Yo, what's up, YouTube? This is your boy Alex. Today is officially Tuesday, and I decided to give you guys some videos. Can't guarantee if it's 50-50 because my dad just left, and sometimes he goes to the supermarket, and it could be 15 minutes, it could be 30 minutes. He might make two or three stops on his errands, and then right in the middle of me filming this video, he can pop right back up as if he had not left, and then you guys be like, why did I stop production in the middle of filming of doing a good video? Because sometimes when I get to have the room to myself, sometimes you get a video, sometimes you get two videos, and then, if I get to be in the living room 3 out of 6 or 7 days out of the week, you get videos in the living room versus I gotta go to other locations, only go on location when it's necessary. Alright, this is going to be a more fun, joyful YouTube video. The next one's going to be more very analytical and very straightforward and serious in that video. And the purpose of that video is because I've been getting the complaints from my best friend, and I keep trying to tell him I want to wait until late September, early October to make that video, but you know the old saying, you know what your grandmother used to say, sometimes it's better to just leave certain stuff alone. And when you tell somebody 5 times, 10, 15 times, just leave something alone and wait until it's the right time and the right place to do it, and they don't, yeah, you can see how that causes some arguments and some backlash. Well, we'll talk about that in the next video. This is supposed to be a more fun, kickback type of video. Alright, the title of this video is going to be called Sex Game, The Age of Heroes, Men in History, Part 1. Now, Part 1 is going to be for the men, and Part 2 is going to be for the women, as you guessed it. I always make videos for men, and I make videos for women. Now, I do have separate YouTube channels, and each channel that I do, they're different subjects, different topics. And some people want me to talk about clothes and fashion with self-improvement. Some people want me to talk about television and film. Some people want me to talk about sports. And then every now and then people want me to talk about sex and dating and life situations. So different subjects, different titles for different people. Alright, this one's going to be talking about real life heroes. Not superheroes from Marvel Comics, DC Comics, but heroes that we fictionalize in our head, that we inspire to grow up and be like in high school, college, or at work. Guys that when you hear their names, they're not just legends and icons. They're bigger than being a legend or an icon. They're actually very influential. They're very real people. Now, some of them on this list are actually real than you think, and then some of them were like, it's 50-50, were they really real, or just movies and television just exaggerated their story, and we don't really know if they're really real because of the movies and television shows and books that we read when we was in junior high, high school, and college. Even today, if you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, or your 50s, you have real heroes that you inspire to be. Not just Batman, Superman, Wolverine, Captain America, Steve Rogers, not just in anime like Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Future Trunks, or Ken and Ryu from Street Fighter, or whoever your hero is in comic books of Marvel, DC, Dark House, Image Comics, anime, or if you like characters from Halo or Metal Gear Solid, because there are people who like heroes in video games, but we're talking about real life heroes. Heroes that at one time in history, they were real people. So part 1 is going to be focusing on men that were real heroes of mythology. You can say Roman mythology, Greek mythology, or just mythology of heroes. Where in the second one, it might be 2 or 3 days later, that I drop the next video where it's going to be the age of women heroes. Because there are some women in history that were real heroes too. And nobody really seems to make videos about that or talk about that, which I find very disturbing because there were some women in history that were also deemed as heroes in that time. So we're going to go ahead and get into the video, and that is going to be David, as in King David. Now, King David really was a real man, a real person during biblical times, and the Bible always tells us the story of David versus Goliath. Goliath was this 6'6", 8-foot tall giant of a man. Some say he was like a cross between a man and a monster. And David was this small, skinny, fragile man who had no fear. And a lot of people in the land was afraid to fight a giant. and he got nicknames. He got called the Giant Slayer because every time he fought a giant, he always won the fight. And you even look in today's culture, when we go to high school and college, we know bullies. A lot of times we always look at our bullies as Goliath, and we always see ourselves as David. Like when you play basketball and football and sports, in high school and college, you used to get into a lot of arguments and fights with bullies, and we used to always have this picture in our head that they were Goliath and we were David. That Goliath got all the hot chicks, and Goliath was playing basketball and football and was popular, and we were that socially awkward nerd or geek in junior high, high school, and college. And when we were in school, we read a lot of books about David versus Goliath. They've made movies, television shows, cartoons, and made him into a legend. And David is one of those guys that represents that you may not be the biggest, you may not be the strongest, but you are the smartest. And that's what David was. He was extremely intelligent. Like, he may have not have been as big or strong or powerful as some of the other heroes that's on this list, but he did kick ass and take names, and he did slay 2 or 3 giants in his prime. Now, no hero is perfect, okay? Nobody on this earth, no man, no woman, young or old, black or white, not even me, okay? I have good days and I have bad days where I strive to be a human being. And I'm not talking about Alexander Odin, the filmmaker, or the YouTube superstar, or Alexander, the amateur bodybuilder, or Alexander, the martial artist. I'm talking about Alexander, the human being. I have good days and bad days where I struggle. And David is a prime example. He was a man who rose to the occasion when nobody else did and became the hero. Not once, but like 3 times he became the hero. Now, he did kind of become tempted. He did fall into temptation, and he did do some things that were questionable. He did become king. He did have a reign. It did last for nearly almost 2 decades, and then it ended. And that goes to show you that you should always remain humble, no matter what. Doesn't matter if you're rich and famous. Doesn't matter if you're just getting by. Doesn't matter if you have advantages over other people. His story always tells you should learn how to be humble. You may never know when something good might come along, and I always say sometimes that can be taken away from you. And he got warnings from people that if he didn't be humble, he would lose everything, and unfortunately he did. He let his own arrogance go to his head, and people began to see a change in him when he beat the second giant. They went from this is a good guy to he's become arrogant and cocky, and some of that is in all of us. We strive to be the best, but then we fall short of stature. So that's what his story should be a reminder to us. Coming in at number 10 is King Arthur. Now, some of y'all might laugh and say, well, I went to high school and college and took 4 or 5 history classes. He don't exist. Well, there's a lot of movies and television shows on King Arthur. It's 50-50 if he really was a real man, but there is some history events that do suggest that there was a man a long time ago during medieval times. There was a real kingdom, there was a real king, and there was a real man, and that King Arthur was not his real name. King Arthur is what he was called because he took the sword out of the stone and became the prodigy chosen one. Like, if you think about it, if you just look at King Arthur, and then you look at some of the stories we got today, like everyone compares Luke Skywalker to King Arthur. They're both chosen ones. They both fight on the side of good. They both fight evil. They're both the hero. They get the cute girls. Now, here's where they're different. King Arthur and eventually got into power, and we had called the Knights of the Crusades, the Knights of the Round Table. Basically, some people would say that's actually an army of God, and he had his own army, and basically, if you look in some of those stories later on, he worked for the Catholic Church, which would later become Rome, which Rome would hundreds or thousands of years later would become a superpower. And he kind of came before Rome became a superpower. Now, whether you believe King Arthur was actually a real person or not, that's open for discussion. That's open for interpretation. We don't know if he's real. We don't know if he's fake. Now, we've seen all the movies, all the television shows, we've seen the commercials, but King Arthur was just like David. He was not the biggest, he was not the strongest, but he was a man of strong conviction. He had his good days, he had his bad days, he had his inner demons. And this also reminds you the consequences of your actions, that when you're not thankful and humble, you can get a consequence. And he kind of came into an age where the world needed a hero, and he became the hero. And then he fell to temptation. He had his rise, he had his fall, and then he had his redemption. Whereas David had a rise and a fall, and David never got the redemption until it was too little too late. Where in King Arthur's case, he had his rise, he had his fall, and then he had his redemption. So whether you believe in the movies, the television shows, the books, the cartoons, whether you believe he's real or fake, he was a hero that some people back then inspired to be. Coming in at number 9 is Robin Hood. Robin the Long Shark. Now, he, on the other hand, actually was an actual real person. Where they say King Arthur is not real, Robin Hood actually was real, because you've heard that story for years and years and years. It's the poor that steals from the rich, right? You see it in movies, television shows, books, cartoons, rock songs, rap songs, right? You hear every time somebody is referred to, I'm Robin Hood, and you know how rap artists are, I'm Robin Hood. Because there's that story that he came in the spring or winter, and he would steal gold from all the kingdoms, and they would have to come find him and put him in jail, and then he escaped prison, and don't nobody know how he did it. And then when he did fought, we found out that he actually was a good guy the whole entire time. But he really was a real person. He was really real. And he kind of represents what the little guys go through at work today. When you go to work, you punch in the clock, you hit the clock, you punch out. You want that respect. And Robin Hood kind of showed what you had to do to get some respect. Now, that don't mean you go and you rob banks and liquor stores, because I'm saying it in my YouTube video. In fact, don't even take none of my words out of context, period. I do not want the police or the FBI knocking on my door saying, hey, kid, what's up? How you doing today, kid? We LAPD, we FBI. We ran across your YouTube video, and we heard you was talking about Robin Hood, and somebody got inspired and go out and did the stuff because they saw your video, and then I got to get interrogated. I don't want none of that bullshit. So don't be taking none of my words out of context. What I'm saying is, he really was a real person, and it really was someone back then in that time period actually doing all of that. Where today, you probably would go to jail for about 25 years for doing it. You would go to federal prison. So that's why I'm saying don't be too inspired when it comes to Robin Hood. Like, understand the good stuff that Robin Hood did for other people. What Robin Hood was, the type of hero was, it's okay to give to people. It's okay if you're rich and famous, or you're just getting by, and it's okay to help people. That's the way you should look at Robin Hood. Besides, the fighting and good versus bad. Coming in at number 8 is a hero that's very real to us. The mighty Thor from Viking Norse god mythology. Now, I know some of y'all are going to be thinking about the Thor from Marvel Comics, that Thor. Well, they're similar. There really was a Thor back then that was similar to the one in the movie. The one from Marvel Comics is like in outer space that protects the 9 realms. Well, on Earth, there really was a guy that was big and buff, strong as I don't know what. He had the same superhuman strength as Hercules, and he was a hero just like Hercules, but he had a big hammer called Marinir that when he throws it, it comes back to him like a frisbee. And that contained his magic powers, where he could hit you with lightning bolts. He was able to cause earthquakes, thunderstorms with weather manipulation, but he had other powers that were depicted in movies and television. He's had plenty of movies and television shows for years. And he actually was a real person, because according to the books and documentaries, the real Thor actually fought magical, mythical monsters on land and sea for like at least 10 years. And in his final battle, he was defeated, or he defeated a monster, but he also got hurt in the process of that. And we all know that Thor His father was Odin. He had a brother. He had an adopted brother named Loki, and he had a sister. So we know that that's the real Thor. The movie Thor shows pretty much the same thing, but they like to, make it a little different and not make it too much like the real Thor's Viking Norse god mythology. And you have people who actually worship him, which you got to be very careful about that, because according to the book of the Old Testament and book of Revelation, the only person you're supposed to be worshiping is the Most High, God. You're not supposed to be worshiping anyone. But people did that with Thor because they wanted food and water, and Thor would give them food and water. But you could also see at the same time, Thor was not happy with people actually doing that to him. There would be times where Thor would say, stop looking at me like I'm some god, because I'm not. I'm just like all of y'all. And when we find out that Thor fought a monster and died in combat, that goes that he was nothing like the Thor that we see in the Thor in the movies, they make him indestructible. Where the Thor of Viking Norse god mythology was actually a human who just was classified as superhuman, who just happened to have magical powers and magical weapons made to make him appear to be like if he was indestructible. He did have a belt that doubled his strength. He does actually had superhuman strength, a lot like Hercules, and he was a hero, and he did get hot chicks, and he was the man back then. He was an alpha. But his story shows what happens when a person gets their story told, and then, we think, but there are some guys that when you go to the gym, they think they're they think they're the mighty Thor, so I don't know what to tell you. But he was a hero, he was a badass, and he was a real person. He kind of came before we got Adam and Eve. There's evidence that when Thor was gone, Adam and Eve showed up. So he kind of was in the biblical times too. Alright, next hero is Maximus from Gladiator. Now, he actually was a real guy, okay? Now, he was 100% real. He is a man's man. He was an alpha male among men. He's from Spain. He was Catholic. He had a family. And one day he was taken from his family and forced to become a slave, like you saw in the movie Gladiator. And then he rose to prominence. Less than 13 years later, he found himself being a general. He was third, then he was second in command, and then he became first command of the General Army of the North, like you heard him say in the movie. And he was the reason why they would win 85 to 90% of those fights. That's what the movie Gladiator reveals. Being called Maximus was because he was supposed to be just a gladiator, but he was already a soldier. He was already a warrior who already was trained for 13 years. And he got framed, and then he had to prove that he was what he said he was. And this movie kind of tells the story of how someone can rise from nothing into everything. So that's what his story represents, so therefore he's a hero. He gives back to the people, not to himself. Alright, coming in at number 6 is Beowulf. Now, Beowulf is just like Thor and just like Hercules. He is a mythical hero that was long, long forgotten since history. Now, he did fight mythical monsters, and he was just a regular man, okay? He had no superpowers, no superhuman strength. He was just a man, either in France or in Ireland, one of those countries, and that's where the story of Beowulf came from. It was a poem, and somebody wrote the poem with nursery rhymes and said there was Beowulf, and Beowulf was actually a man who fought animals for exercise, for challenges. And he was a guy that would fight monsters that nobody wanted to fight. And you should know the story that the first monster he fought actually was his biological son. He didn't know it at the time. That he, fell to temptation and some magic was used on him. See, back then people believed in love potions and things of that nature, and he kind of was under some influence and was not aware of it until 10 years later, and then he ended up fighting all these monsters, and then he became king, and he basically would have one last fight as king, which kind of showed that he was going to be obligated to the people no matter what. He didn't let anything stop him from fighting for the people's cause. He didn't let fame, fortune, women, or glory, he let none of that stop him. He showed what a true hero was. No matter how much success he got, he always tried his best to help people. That's a prime example of what a real hero is. Coming in at number 5 is Themistocles from the movie 300 Rise of an Empire. Now, he was as real can get. Now, he was everything that a man, an alpha male should be. He was bigger, stronger, faster, athletic. He had 13 years of military experience. He was a war general. He was skilled with weapons, battle strategy, battle tactician. He knew battle formations. He knew when it was okay to be diplomatic in politics and when it was time to be a soldier. So he was pretty well crafted in his set of skills. So we had 2 battles that took place in history. The first battle took place on land, and the second battle took place on sea. When you watch the first movie of 300, we just see the battle of Thermopylae. We see, the Spartans fight on land. That's what the whole first movie was. The second movie touched on there was another battle that took place on sea. And that's where his character come up. That he was fighting the Persians for such a long time that it just happened to get to a point where they needed to make a sequel to say, hey, there was this other badass out here that was fighting. Now, the one thing people hate about 300 Rise of an Empire is that they made it into a love story. It's like they just couldn't help themselves. Like, okay, you're telling the story of a mythical battle of good versus evil, right versus wrong, man versus nature, man versus himself, and man try to realize his purpose, but they made it into a love story, which, like, okay, there are people that probably fell in love, and there probably was something like that between the main character and a girl, but it was like they did that because they knew that that would make you watch the movie more if they did it. Where in real historical fact, the guy actually did fight the girl several times during that battle. But there really was no time, like, during a time of war, there really is no falling in love. So that's probably why historical teachers in high school and college gets angry, red in the face, where you bring up movies like 300 and 300 Rise of an Empire. They go, those were movies. And they would probably want you to watch the documentaries to see the difference between the movies, the TV shows, and the documentaries. But he was a real hero. He was a real badass. And he was the complete opposite of King Leonidas. Because he was more diplomatic. He was more, I'm open to talking out negotiations than fighting out negotiations. Like, he could do both, which was very rare. He could talk the talk, he could walk the walk, and if he had to fight, he could fight and kick ass. That was the difference between him and King Leonidas. Alright, coming in at number 4 is King Leonidas from 300, the movie. Now, King Leonidas was the complete opposite of Demophiles, because King Leonidas was from the Spartan army, hardcore, badass, took no shit from no one. He didn't care if you were bigger, stronger, faster than him. It didn't make no difference to him. And you only got like one warning. Other characters or other kings from that time period of Greece gave you like 3 or 4 warnings or 5 warnings. He was the only one that gave you like maybe 1 warning. If you were lucky, you got 2 warnings. And then, like you saw in the movie where he shouted out, "This is Sparta," he probably wasn't saying that back in the day. They just said that for, to make him look more badass, more alpha. But the real King Leonidas probably would actually do exactly what you saw in the movie. He did fight, and they did show that he was diplomatic, which means he was diplomatic only when it came to trying not to go to war, but then when he had to go to war and fight, he had no problem doing it. And the way he was winning those fights, it was a total of 7 days. That's what people don't understand about real life's depiction of 300 in the movie. The movie make it where it's 3 days, right? Where in real life, that fight lasted for 7 days, and when it got to the 7th day, they lost due to, starvation. No food, no water, they're tired, they're exhausted, they want rest, they've been at it for 7 days, they couldn't go back to Sparta, because if they did, they would have got invaded. So he didn't have no option in his obligation of being king. It was either you surrender to Xerxes and the Persian Empire, or you fight for your people. So he didn't have a whole lot of say in the matter. And he showed, even in odds of impossible, I'm going to lose, I'm going to get beat, Even when he got beat, he showed a true class of what a man is. Like, win or lose, I'm going to show history that someone did challenge you. And for him, it wasn't about winning, wasn't about losing, wasn't about accolades, it wasn't about glory, fame, and fortune, none of that. It was about standing up on your principles and fighting for your belief system. And then you got some men today that fight for their belief system, and you got some people who don't do it. So King Leonidas was more of a person that takes action but could talk, whereas Themistocles was more, I can do both. King Leonidas was good at being diplomatic, but he was known for his combat skills and being that hardcore Spartan badass. Coming in at number 3 is Perseus from Clash of the Titans. Now, I know people do not like the movie depictions because they don't tell the true, actual story of how man got his consequences from above. Well, the real Perseus was close to what you saw in the movies. He was quiet, he was humble, he wasn't high class, he wasn't middle class. He didn't think he was better than other people. He just saw everybody the same. He didn't look at you any different or any less. He treated men and women with the same courtesy of respect. If somebody needed some help, he would stop everything what he was doing and actually help that man or woman no matter how difficult the day was. He would leave work, go home, prepare the meal, and take care of his family. And if someone tried to break into his home and invade his home, he would fight that invader. But he never went as far as to make myself famous or rich. He just saw himself as a regular person. When there was a time of war, he went to the military and fought for his country. And when he got an advantage, where he got, some magical weapons from Zeus, he didn't really take all the weapons because he felt that that was giving him too much of an advantage. So he did what any man would do. He tried to be a man and try to understand what being a man is. Now, he did get punished when he decided to teach us, the elements of fire, which reveals even a hero can make a mistake. You know how they say people make mistakes and people learn from their mistakes and people have to learn how to correct their mistakes? Well, that movie kind of reveals what happens when you make a mistake at work, at home, in a relationship. What happens when you take a woman out to lunch and dinner and you make a mistake? What happens when you get into an argument? You have to learn from those mistakes, and he basically taught man fire, and Zeus did not want him teaching man fire because Zeus saw into a future, which, again, you got to be careful how you say that, because if you read the Old Testament, it was the Most High who saw into a future that man would use fire to basically do what we're doing today. And you kind of see how that has consequences, basically. And Perseus got punished for doing that. Eventually, he got his rise, his fall, and his redemption too. It just came much later than most of the characters on this list. Alright, coming in at number 2 is Hercules. Now, every man thinks they're Hercules. I think I'm Hercules. You think you're Hercules. All of us think we're Hercules. At different times, we think we're Hercules because we see those movies, those television shows. But what people don't realize is that the real Hercules did 12 labors because what I just said about Perseus. He made a mistake and he had to correct those mistakes. So the 12 labors are a representation of what happens when what it means to go for redemption. Like, he was a hero. He fought monsters just like Thor and Beowulf. He was a hero. He was the man. He was the ultimate alpha male. He had everything. He had a family. Women liked it. Women found him physically, sexually attractive. Kids inspired to want to be him. And men either wanted to be Hercules or they hated and resented Hercules in jealousy. He would have fights with his half-brother Ares. He would fight Hades, the god of the underworld. And Hercules basically came from a one-night stand. Because, Zeus, came down from heaven into the form of an ego and made love to a woman, and boom, Hercules was born. And because he's so super cool and badass, he got a first name but no last name. And basically, he fought monsters. He fought mythical monsters with magic. Hercules had no superpowers, okay? Hercules had superhuman strength and that was about it. And most of his fights, Hercules won most of his fights with his intelligence, his strength, his courage, and being fearless. Like, Hercules would do stuff that most of us talk about doing, and then as soon as it's time for us to show that we can do it, we run away and hide. Where Hercules never ran away, never hide. And if Hercules lost some fights, because he did win some fights, but he did get his ass kicked, and he did learn from those mistakes. And the real true story of Hercules was he had to repent for his sins. You know, Hera came in his dreams, and he accidentally, lost his family and went into madness, and he had to repent for those sins. And that's the thing about Hercules. No matter how strong or powerful Hercules appears to be, by the end of the day, he was human. Now, I know they're going to say that he became immortal, but again, that's open for interpretation. It's 50-50 if he actually became immortal or not. Now, he was a real person. He was the reason why we have the Olympic Games today, and he did create a style called wrestling, and there was a city named after Hercules. Now, he did go to other countries and fight, and the 10-year war of Sparta versus, it was Sparta versus Troy. So he was the hero in that 10-year war. And like I said, it's open for debate if he became immortal or not. But there was a guy walking around big and buff and strong like Hercules. There was a real person. Most of the time, he was by himself. He was mostly a loner. Not always around too many people. So that's pretty much, he fought animals. So you should know the actual story of Hercules. And he did go to the island of the Amazon. And he did get him some female attention. But he had to do his 12 labors, which shows you don't want to be distracted when you go on your journey. A lot of us, we get distracted from the goal. Like when we're at work, we get distracted, and what your boss tells you, focus at the task. When we're in school or when we're driving in the car, we see a fine girl walking, and sometimes a police car might roll up with that look like, man, you need to focus. Well, Hercules was a prime example of if you're focused, hard work pays off. When he did the 12 labors, that's what it represents. Focus. Always stay on the goal. Don't ever be distracted. And when you get distracted, you fall short of what the goal was in the first place. All right, coming in at number 1 is the Archangel Michael. Nobody on this list comes very close than Archangel Michael. He's by far the most strongest, the most powerful angel that there is, and he is the one who gets his direct orders from God, or in this case, you can say the Most High. Archangel Michael does not smoke, does not drink, does not do drugs, and he does not fall into temptation. He is a perfect example of what each and every single one of us need to strive to be. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. He is what we need to be. He is